And good afternoon and welcome. It is 3:30 p.m. here on Wednesday, February 17th, and our author series continues today. It has been a little while getting through the first couple of weeks of the new year, holidays, and more, but we're happy to bring back our author series. Of course, our author series is brought to you by Charter Books, which is opening at 8 Broadway here in Newport in 2021. That's this year. In just a couple of weeks. They said late winter, so they're on deadline now. Steve and his crew over at Charter Books, but they are open online, and any book that we talk about, any author that we interview, they will try to get the book. You can support our local bookstore while you're doing it. Joining me for these series, as usual, is Mr. Frank Prosnitz. How are you?
Pretty good, Brian. I haven't seen you in a while.
Yeah, it's been at least 2 hours.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, it's great to get back to the author series. Today it's Christine Lajewski. She is a horror novelist and a short story writer, and she lives in Providence by way of Flint, Michigan. Retired alternative high school teacher. So we look forward to hearing about her. What motivates somebody to write about horror?
Well, let's ask her. Here she is. Hi, Christine.
It's wicked fun. I'm gonna give you a little correction. It's pronounced Lajewski.
Lajewski. Well, I was close. Yeah. I got some of the letters right.
It's one is silent. You know, if you're in Poland, they'd say Lajewski, and we don't even try that here. It's not going to work.
Well, Christine, before we even get started, why don't we start and make sure that we're going to talk about a lot today, but let's make sure that we have a website or a place in case this is all people hear about, where they can go to find out more info about you. Okay,
it's Christine M. Lajewski, LAJEWSKI.com. And I also have author pages under Christine Lajewski on Facebook and Amazon. Can everybody see that?
Oh, look at that. All prepared.
Hold on 1 second.
There we go. And you'll notice at the top, you can read a free sample, the first 60 pages of my novel, Bone Belly, which we'll be talking about, at www.diverterpublishing.com/books/bb.html. I'll leave that there a second if anybody wants to write it down.
Perfect. And we'll make sure we grab that and put it in the story with this video as well. In case anybody...
Yeah, you get a nice try before you buy.
Yeah, there you go. Now, Christine, tell us a little bit about your background. An alternative high school teacher. What subjects?
Well, I taught mostly science, but I've taught a lot of different things. Alternative high school is, you'll have something you specialize in or concentrate in, but you need to be ready to think on your feet and jump in. And what makes, I was doing this in Massachusetts, in Braintree, Massachusetts, and it's an excellent program where part of each day is all the students who all have issues of different types. They might be behavioral, they might be on the spectrum, they might just be angry or anxious, survivors of abuse. Sometimes just a little fish that gets swamped in a big pond. And at the end of every day is what we would call a school meeting. And that is where they get peer reviewed on good things they did and things they didn't. They can earn privileges in programs like that. Yet they still have to meet the curriculum standards. They still have to, pass the same exams as everybody else. But we get to know students very well, smaller groups. So in addition to teaching science, I did things like Holocaust curriculum. I taught psychology with students, and we get to know the students so well that they learn to trust us. And we hope that by the time they graduate, besides meeting all the standards and being the best student they can be, they've got some tools in their toolbox for coping mechanisms, for dealing with anger, for dealing with substance abuse, for dealing with family issues. So very rewarding, but also that's part of the dark side. When you learn what so many of these students have been through, that darkness, and it's like I can't even begin to tell you how much I admire some of these kids, what they've been through, and how they end up being the strongest person in their family sometimes, or how their parents have worked so hard with them to overcome things like depression and bipolar disorder and on all the things like that. But you do get a glimpse at the dark night of the soul. You really do. So that's one thing I think that led me to become a horror writer, but I was kind of going in that direction already.
When did you first realize that you wanted to be a writer, and what was your first effort?
Okay, before I could read and write, I was doing little cartoons. I liked art too, and they were little comic strips that told a story. And I do remember one involved fights between the sun and the moon. They had legs, they had arms, they had faces, and they would fight each other. I mean, when you're 4 or 5 years old, that's kind of the level you're thinking at. And then I began to write poetry as a child, by the time I could read and write. In Flint, Michigan, the local newspaper had something called the Wide Awake Club. You could send in poems and you could send in stories. And if you won and got published that week, you got to go down to the newspaper office and pick out. They had a wonderful, beautiful collection of hardcover books, and you could pick out anything you wanted. That was your prize. So probably between the ages of 9 and 11, I probably got published there 3 times and brought home books that were, just some really wonderful books as prizes. And just wrote for the high school newspaper, wrote for my college newspaper, wrote some novels. But, like I said, we're going back to the age of 4 or 5.
You get back to Flint often?
Not as much these days because we're spread out. So I have my brother living there. It's not a hard drive to get there, a little lengthy through Canada. But so many of my cousins and stuff are so much older and stuff. So we're starting to lose those family members now.
We belong to a national news group called Local Independent Online News Publishers, and I work with, or I cross paths a lot with a news website out there called Flint Beat.
Cool.
Yeah, they cover a lot of that area. So I see a lot about Flint. So just a funny coincidence.
It's certainly been through some really tough times. Back when I was a child, though, I mean, we're talking about growing up in the 60s. It was a wonderful place to live because the General Motors and C.S. Mott, one of the founders of General Motors, had put a lot of money into that city. We had a planetarium. We had wonderful libraries. We had something called the Canusa Games, where we had our own little Olympics if you qualified for them, with our sister city of, and I can't think of the name now, I think it was Hamilton, Ontario, was our sister city. There was an art museum, and I can remember as a high school student seeing Salvador Dali. They had this was before, it must have been before he became a really huge name, but almost every one of those really famous paintings that people think of when they think of Dali was there. And it was like that amazing opportunity.
Good, Frank.
Okay. I want to explore the writing career, of course. So you said you wrote novels before you did the horror novels?
Yeah, and they did not get published. I had this idea that because I was a special needs teacher and I worked with a very difficult population, some of them in the juvenile justice system and things like that, I had to write about that, right? It was like my duty to write about it. I did not enjoy writing about it. I did a couple novels along those lines, and they never went anywhere. And I finally realized they were dreary to write, so they had to be dreary to read. It wasn't what I wanted to do. And I would have these ideas for fantasies and not horror necessarily, but more along the fantasy line. But I would think, oh my God, I can't write that. That's too ridiculous. And I turned 60 and I realized, who cares? That's what I want to write. I'm going to write. That's what I'm going to do.
We've had a wide variety of authors on now, and some of the authors say that when their friends, family, loved ones read their books, they often ask, where does that come from? Do you also get that question?
I get that. And I can tell you a lot of the ideas just pop into my head. My first novel was a fantasy, what I would call a spiritual fantasy. And it's this one. Let me hold it up. That's pronounced Biagtor. And this was a book I had to write because I lost several family members. It's now 21, 22 years ago in a house fire in Michigan outside of Flint. It was devastating. And this was the book I had to write. I am a Buddhist. This particular story incorporates the Buddhist way of looking at death and suffering, but also aspects of fairy tales, like my favorite, which is the white snake. And it's the woman who has these horrible losses happen to her, very similar to mine, ends up with this bitter taste in her mouth, and she can't get rid of it. It's like a whole year she's living with it. And one day she sees a white snake trapped in her garden, and she frees it. And as soon as she does, the bitter taste goes away, and she realizes she can hear her dog talking to her. So there's 3 animals that she interacts with a lot to help her through her grief because she's turning her back on life. And one is her own dog, which is modeled on my late dog named Jet. He was a Pharaoh hound. He was the funniest dog I ever knew. The things that happen in the book, the games he plays, are things that Jet really did, the real Jet. And I just put color commentary into Jet's mouth for it. But there's also a doe she meets up with while she's hiking who lost a fawn. And there's a vulture who follows her around and craps on her roof and makes fun of her. And it's through these interactions that she's able to accept life again and love again. So that came from real experience. My brother and sister, they both picked up the book and put it down several times because it was too real for them. They finally did read it, but it was difficult. It was that close to what they felt. That is how I worked through my grief. My kids have not read this one. And when I asked them why, my feelings were a little hurt. They both said, we just won't be able to stand knowing that this was you and you were that unhappy. So it's. And
so what did that do for you? It's, while others may have shied away from it because they thought it was too raw, how did that help you in your process?
It was the fantasy aspect of it. And because I went the fantasy fairy tale route, suddenly the door was open. I'll tell you where that idea came from too. Way back, I don't know if you remember the film March of the Penguins. I went to see it in the theaters with a friend. And there is a part there where 2 young, inexperienced penguins, they're not good at taking care of their egg, and it freezes and it cracks, and they know their chick will never be born. And the mother starts to just cry. It makes me tear up still, sorry. And I could see parents brought their kids to see the movie because it's a wonderful movie, but I could see every mother in the theater, and myself included, just doing this, clutching their heart. And that was what got me started. It's like the animals know death and they mourn. People know death and they mourn. How do I put those 2 together? And that became Biagtor.
So you went from that book, and how long until you decided that you were ready for the next one. And was that next one Bone Belly?
The next one was Bone Belly. I was writing some short stories at the same time. Bone Belly was a different thing. I am also a haunt actor, and I started that in 1999 when Spooky World was at Gillette Stadium.
I remember.
If any of you went there, I was there. Okay, I was one of the Grim Reapers on the hayride, and then I did a few other things there. And I began to develop some characters when it moved to the Bayside Expo, and then it went to New Hampshire. So I started, if any of you are familiar with Trails to Terror at Highland Farm in Wakefield in Rhode Island, I was there almost until they closed, and now I'm doing Barrett's Haunted Mansion in Abington, Mass. And that was when I began to think about writing horror, because there'd be times where, the night might be a little slow, or you had a little time between when people were coming through that you were going to scare. And I began to just think about dreadful things. A lot of it was I'm thinking about characters, and while I'm thinking about characters I could develop and play, I'm also thinking about what they would be like in a story. So some of the female characters that I've written and some of the male characters I've written have come from those times when I'm doing the haunt acting, and just nasty ideas are popping into my head. I also spent a lot of time just thinking, what are some really terrible ways to die? What would I really not want to have happen to me? And those became stories as well. Bone Belly, though, is my ode to the haunted attraction industry. So in addition to having a character who's condemned to hell, and of course he's condemned in Rhode Island, where else would you go? He has a demon.
I have so many comments to go with that, but
go let it loose. Go ahead.
No, that's all right.
Let's face it, there's a history of weirdness, because Rhode Island was a place that allowed people to be free to worship and free to think. Unlike Massachusetts, it got weird really fast. I mean, it's an amazing history when you think about it. So Bone Belly is based on Trails to Terror. And this condemned character, he has, if you get condemned and there's a chance you might get redeemed, you get a demon caseworker. The caseworker treats you terribly. And your punishment is somehow related to the things you did, as a sinner, yet you're robbed of your memory. So he becomes a hungry ghost. He's always hungry, but he has this ginormous head, little pencil neck, throat, and a big stomach. But anything but the smallest morsels hurt him to eat them, and they turn foul and nasty on his tongue, except for one thing: human flesh. That's the one thing that tastes good to him. He kind of figures out that maybe that's a test. If I don't do this, if I don't give in to my urges to eat people, maybe I can earn my way out of this hell. He never really knows until the end, when he finds out what's going to happen. Yep, that's Bone Belly. And at the same time, he's living this miserable, lonely existence. So he hears the sounds of the music and the screams and sees the flashing lights of this haunted attraction at a nearby farm. He follows the noise, and he just falls in love with the place. He spends years just watching what the haunters do. He eventually begins to insert himself into scenes, because he realizes they're all trying to be him. There's nothing out there that's scarier than he actually is. So the story is about his attempts to redeem himself, but he also had a partner in crime who shows up, and so he fails. He fails actually more than once in trying to curb his appetites. So it's all about his struggle, and it's a fight between good and evil.
You also do a lot of short stories?
Yes, and I've had quite a few of them published. This is my short story collection erring on the side of calamity, because many of them are about, should I turn right? Should I turn left? You turn right, and it turns out that was a pretty disastrous decision. So in a lot of these stories, people they make bad choices. They do bring some of this stuff on themselves, but some of it is just, it's the toss of the dice. You shouldn't have done what the dice told you to do. So, they've been published in a number of anthologies and small magazines. My latest is, I don't know if you're familiar with the New England Horror Writers. It's an online Facebook group for people who write horror, and they put out a wonderful anthology, and they just came out with one called Wicked Women. I should have put a copy of it here so I can show you the cover. Do you have a second? I can run and get it.
Yeah, sure. Frank and I can talk for a minute and remind people that if they want to see anything from Christine, here is her website, and here's Erring on the Side of Calamity, and you can find more here. Some books, some blogs, and a little weirdness is what the website says, Frank.
Yeah, it's an interesting website. I have not read any of Christine's books or short stories, but in listening to her, I feel compelled to. I don't know how I'm going to feel afterwards, but feel
Frank,
somewhat compelled to.
You've been a writer in the reporter sense, journalist sense, for decades. I'm not going to say how many because we'll give your age away.
32.
But have you ever been compelled to write nonfiction or horror or romance or anything like that?
Oh, I've thought. There's no doubt that I have. I've thought often about writing. I've written a chapter in a book. That's as far as I've gone. But I've thought about nonfiction in particular. There's lots of stories to be told. It might be my next project. I spent a lot of time in the treasurer's office during the banking crisis, and have a lot of stuff there. Just wondering if anybody's still interested in it, but we'll see.
That's it.
We'll see.
And yeah, I mean, Bone Belly. You have all sorts of, and here comes the latest, possibly. She can't hear us yet, but she will hear us here in a minute. And there she is.
There I am, and this is it. This is an amazing cover. Available on Amazon and probably a few local bookstores. I'm not sure if it's in Stillwater Books. I'm not sure about that, but
okay.
Great cover. Oh man, I wish
Awesome.
I wish I was as good as that artist.
So that's a collection of short stories,
all written by women, all horror.
And how many do you have in that book?
I believe it's 17.
Wow, that's a good gift right there. I actually think I know who. I've got to be careful, but I might have to pick that up for a gift for somebody.
It's been really well reviewed. There is not a weak story in that collection. And like I said, New England Horror Writers puts out a really good anthology. Anyway, there's none of this. We need a couple more stories. All right, we'll throw this in. It's good. It's awesome. For anybody out there who is a horror writer, you have to live in New England. But even if you're new, if you're aspiring, it's a good group. The support is wonderful, and you'll get great feedback. And it's a great group.
So, Christine, what's next? A romance, a comedy? What's next for you? Do you have a goal? How often would you like to, or do you plan on producing something new?
I kind of lost a little bit of time because I was moving from Massachusetts to Rhode Island. It was time to downsize, but I am working on probably it's going to be a novella, and it's kind of in the vein of dark fairy tales. I find myself writing more and more of that type of stuff, and stuff that's very nature-based. A lot of my stories are more and more about what you can find crawling under a log, only maybe bigger. And I also work at Mass Audubon, although I haven't done this past year because of COVID. So anything that's out there, spiders, crawly things, or just, you think you know what you're dealing with in the woods and you don't. So this is going to combine that, a little bit of supernatural father and mother, and their son is kind of outstrips them in what they're able to do, but it doesn't end up and work out very well for anybody. So I'm really just getting started on that, is the way I would like to. And I'm also working on a number of new short stories at the same time. It doesn't take, you sort of see who's looking for submissions. And if there's a theme or something, it usually isn't that hard to knock out a story in a couple weeks.
Who's your favorite author?
My favorite author, for horror, I love Shirley Jackson. And believe it or not, I like Stuart O'Nan. He wrote a book called A Prayer for the Dying, which was referred to in one review as philosophical horror. It's like 140 pages, and it's just so intense and so wonderfully written. My other favorite authors, though, I do like the other great horror writers. I love the elegance of Edgar Allan Poe. He is a favorite, and he's the first one I read, I think, that and Shirley Jackson. But the other books I've really liked have been, let me think, because we're going back a while. All the Light You Cannot See, wonderful story. And I always was a big Tolkien fan.
So I'll take this from a different direction, Frank, because I was going to ask a similar question. What are you binge watching or binge reading?
Okay, I just started Octavia Butler's Earthseed trilogy. It's something I've been meaning to read, and I hadn't done it for a long, long, long time. Prior to that, I've been reading more history, more nonfiction. So the books I've kind of simultaneously reading is Red Comet, which is a biography of Sylvia Plath, which does not dwell on the suicide. It dwells on her as the poet, which I think is long overdue. And then there is a really great, and the name is escaping me right now, but I'll try to find it before we sign off. It's a professor who's been a scholar of Emily Dickinson, and I love her poetry so much. And she does it, she doesn't just sit down and tell her story. She goes event by event, the things that made her the poet and the person that she was. And it's a wonderful, wonderful read. I'll look that up on my phone, and when I have the title of it, I'll give it to you. Lincoln in the Bardo was another one. It's like I must have read that in like 24 hours. It was, oh my God, what a great book that was.
It is indeed. I read that.
Yeah, and it has that little bit of weirdness to it, yet it's profound. And it just sorrowful, yet hopeful.
Yeah.
So in terms of what I've been watching, wow. Okay, I put this off a long time, but I raced through both seasons of The Mandalorian. Mind you, I am not the biggest Star Wars fan. I liked it. I liked the first 3 movies. Whatever came after it I don't have another word for it, kind of sucked. Sorry. And I'm finding that movies like Rogue One and The Mandalorian are better than almost than the original Star Wars. It's just great storytelling and great acting, and I enjoyed those so much. I liked the Netflix series on the Haunting of Hill House, even though I don't know why they bothered even using the title, because it bears no resemblance or almost no resemblance to the book except the characters' names. Let me see, what else did I really, really, really like? Actually, rewatching all of Breaking Bad. Phenomenal.
Okay.
Oh, phenomenal series. And, what else? What else did I really like?
While you think of that, one of the things Frank and I has come up with a couple authors is, even though we're in a pandemic and everybody's locked in their house, people still say, "Oh, I just don't have time to read." Can you help us with that? Just where do you find the time to read, or how can people make the time to read more?
Well, it's not fair. I'm retired, and my kids are adults. So while I do work part time, or I would like to, I can't wait to get back to working part time at Mass Audubon, and I volunteer 1 day a week at Mystic Aquarium with the sea lions. I think for me, this is how I get anything done. And that is on days if I'm not working, okay, it's up in the morning early, exercise or yoga, and get into those tasks you want to do. To heck with the house, to heck with cleaning and gardening. I'm personally a day person, a morning person. The writing gets done in the morning, even if it's only a few pages. The reading gets done maybe when I'm ready to take a break in the afternoon or in the evening. But you kind of have to have that. You have to have your routine. If your routine is to play a game or start scrolling through whatever you're going to binge watch that day, then it's time to develop a new routine.
Do you find, I know I find when I read a great deal that it improves my own skills. I become a better writer for it. I become more informed. I learn from everything that I read. I just think it sharpens your skills.
I think it does too. I mean, at the very least, if you go back to children in school, reading expands their vocabulary, and it expands. They learn how to structure a sentence from seeing how it's done. And also the possibilities. The sense of fun, how to express sorrow. Using your words, how to express anger. So there's so much that's beneficial from reading.
When I think of the books that you're doing, I think of many of these books because I hear these attributes. The one that I find is so compelling among novelists is imagination, is letting people explore their own imagination, and there's an incredible world out there.
Yes. Well, and it's like traveling, and not all of us can travel. It's traveling is wonderful for expanding your horizons and the way you look at people, but it also takes money, and it takes the world not being in a pandemic.
And Christine, did we miss anything today? We have your website. Oh, I guess I have one follow-up question is, if people are thinking, gifts, presents, who should...
Oh, thank you, Ryan. I'll take anything you send me. Oh, that's not where you were going with that. I got it wrong again.
Who should people be buying your books for?
Because they tend to have, a lot of them have a spiritual aspect to them. You can do that. I have to say my horror is getting darker and darker, perhaps a bit more gruesome. But if you're even, unless the person absolutely hates horror, they should, I think they should give it a try. I do have a sense of humor, so you'll find that in the books. And I would say, I think I think if you like horror, you should just try new people that you hadn't before, because there gets to be a point where even somebody who's really, really great, there's, Poe or Stephen King or Joe Hill, the more they write, there tends to get a little bit of repetition of ideas. And not every effort is superlative. I mean, Stephen King would say that about himself. He says he feels a compulsion to write. And not every book hits it out of the park, and that's okay. He can afford to do that too. So I would say, look for something that goes against the tried and true for yourself. And keep in mind, there's so many genres of horror. There's stuff called splatterpunk, which is like just grotesquely violent, and there's horror erotica out there. I mean, you can pretty much find anything in horror. Mine isn't that. There's some, like I said, there's some gruesome stuff in there. There's violence in there. I'm not afraid to let a child die, but I won't let you won't get the details on it.
Frank, any follow-ups?
No, I just one more quick question, and I know I've heard this from a number of friends who are authors of one sort or another, that you were talking about your daily routine, and that they often set themselves a goal for writing of each day, be it a number chapter, be it a number of words, but that each day they had to accomplish a certain goal. Do you do that?
Yes and no. I write in my head, and that sounds like an excuse for procrastinating, but it's not. It's there's one thing I can't stand, is just staring at a screen with nothing coming. And I'm thinking about, I'm a great multitasker. So if I'm staring at a screen and not actually writing, I'm thinking, oh my God, I got to do this. I have to finish laundry. I have to wash the dishes. I have to walk the dogs. I do the writing in my head. I really, really do. Like Bone Belly, at least 50% of it was written on my commutes from Norton to Braintree when I was teaching. And because of the work because I was working full time, and that's an intense type of teaching. So it's not like I would come home and just sit down and write all the time. When I did sit down, I didn't have writer's blocks. It just exploded at that point. But in addition to, I didn't just sort of go through ideas and outlines. I was actually structuring paragraphs and sentences, and then I would rehearse and repeat them to myself, and they were still there when I sat down to write. I don't know that would work for everybody. I can also tell you that just the idea of speech to text software does not appeal to me at all. I actually want to keep the cap on it so that it does go bam when I sit down to write. So I think that's helpful. I would also say I don't write great poetry, but I do write poetry. And they'll just be like little 3 or 4 line things describing something I saw that appealed to me. It could be a little flower that was hidden in a corner, or a really great spider web or something like that. But those phrases then find their way into writing. Reading poetry and trying to write poetry is the way to hone, I think, is a way to hone your skills with descriptive language. You don't have to steal from the poets, but see how they do it.
All right, Christine, did we miss anything today?
Wow. I don't know. I never did find the name of that book. I have it on a shelf somewhere.
It's all right. You can share it with us if you'd like down the line, and we can find a way to put it in the comments or whatever it may be.
Okay.
All right. And we wish you the very best of luck, and we'll be checking out your website and ordering some books. And we appreciate you taking the time to meet with us today. And
I appreciate the opportunity.
Well, thank you, Christine.
Yes, I'm so glad you reached out. Thanks a lot. Have a wonderful week and a wonderful weekend.
And you as well.
All right. And Frank, that's going to do it for this edition.
All right. We're back at it tomorrow, 3:30. I think it's 3:30 or 3 o'clock. I'm not sure which, with General Treasurer Seth Magaziner. We're going to be talking bonds.
It is at 3 o'clock tomorrow. At 1 o'clock tomorrow, we'll be bringing you the Rhode Island Department of Health's COVID-19 press briefing. Tons of vaccine news that came down today. Visit WhatsUpNewp.com, sign up for our newsletter. And about 45 minutes, I'm going to be sending out a newsletter with all of the latest COVID vaccine news. There is news for pretty much everybody of all ages. So make sure that you do check that out. Of course, sign up for our newsletters anyway, and you'll find out about all these interviews we're doing and much more. And if you know an author or an actress or somebody who'd be interested to speak to, send them our way, Ryan@WhatsUpNewp.com. And, of course, I want to thank our friends over at Charter Books for sponsoring this series.
Yeah, absolutely.
Our ongoing author series. Charter Books is opening down there at 8 Broadway for Rhode Island Directions. It used to be Hope. And it's right there, Lower Broadway, and they're opening soon, and you can shop them now. Contact them about Christine's books, charterbookstore.com, and that you can enjoy free local delivery or in-store pickup. All right, Mr. Prosnitz.
Well, thank you, Ryan. This was fun today. We had a couple of great interviews. I look forward to getting back at it tomorrow.
All right, don't get too scared reading those books.
Oh, no, I'm going to let my imagination go wild.
All right, my friends. Until next time. And we want to thank Christine for joining us. And again, you can visit her website. It's right here at the bottom. And make sure you put that M in there and check out her books, her blogs, and much more. We thank her for joining us today.